My one 9-year-old daughter ignored me and married a 2 6-year-old bread delivery man. Now she lives in a basement fighting constantly. And when she came back after 2 years, she said, "You were right, Dad. I'm 44 years old. I run a creative agency, and 2 years ago, my one 9-year-old daughter married a 2 6-year-old guy who delivers bread for his parents. And basically, I knew it was going to be a disaster, but she didn't listen to me. And now I'm trying not to say I told you so because, well, I'm her father and I love her more than anything in the world. But damn if it isn't hard to watch her crash into a wall when you could have prevented it. I guess I should start at the beginning, when her mother and I got divorced. Zoe was like 12 years old. And the truth is, the divorce was pretty amicable at first. Or so we thought. You know, the typical speech about we're still going to be a family and all that. But then Melissa, my ex, met someone like 6 months later and got married within a year, and suddenly she had a new house, a new husband, and then the babies started coming, one after another, 3 in total. And Zoe was kind of left in the background, you know? It's not that Melissa was intentionally a bad mother, but she was so absorbed in her perfect new life that my daughter basically became the free babysitter for her half-siblings every time she went to visit. I could see it. Of course I could see it. Zoe started to change, to become quieter, more withdrawn. She'd tell me everything was fine, but I knew it wasn't, and I started to compensate the only way I knew how, working more to give her more things, more time with me when I was home, trying to be both dad and mom at the same time. I became super protective, probably too much, but I felt like I had to make up for the fact that her mother had practically replaced her. And then came the high school thing. Zoe just stopped going. She was like 16 years old, and one day she told me she couldn't anymore, that she didn't see the point, that everyone at school was idiots. I tried everything, therapy, talking to counselors. I even considered changing her school, but nothing worked. She stayed home for 2 full years, basically doing nothing but being in her room or watching TV. I kept working like crazy because the agency was growing and I needed the money to maintain everything. And part of me thought that maybe she just needed time, you know? That eventually she'd find her way. And she did, kind of. After 2 years, she decided to go back to high school. I was so proud, so relieved. I thought, okay, finally she's maturing, she's finding her path. She signed up for night classes to catch up and seemed really committed. For 6 months, everything was great. She was studying, going out with new friends, seemed happier than she'd been in years. I thought we'd finally gotten through the worst of it. And then she met Trevor. God, Trevor. The first time Zoe told me about him, I was at the office. It was like 9 at night because I was finishing an important presentation, and she called me all excited, saying she'd met someone special. I asked her where she met him, and she said at a coffee shop where he was delivering pastries from his parents' bakery. Okay, I thought. A guy who works. That's good. And I'm like, 26? Zoe, you're 19. And she got all defensive, saying age didn't matter and that he was very mature and blah blah blah. Turns out Trevor is 26 years old and never finished high school either. He dropped out of school in sophomore year, worked at various places without direction, married a girl when he was 2, Threesh was 21. They divorced after a year because, according to Zoe, she was crazy. Although I suspect there's more to that story. And now he lives with his parents and delivers bread. It's not that I have anything against people who work deliveries. Not at all. But when your one 9-year-old daughter who's barely trying to finish high school tells you she's going to marry a 2 6-year-old guy who has no education, no ambitions beyond delivering bread for his parents, and already has 1 divorce under his belt, as a parent you start to worry, you know what I mean? But I tried to be open-minded. I really tried. I told her I'd like to meet him, that maybe we could have dinner together, the 3 of us. She agreed but seemed nervous, like she knew I was going to have objections, and she was right to be nervous because when I finally met Trevor, all my concerns were confirmed and I even discovered some new ones. Trevor came to dinner at my house like 2 weeks after Zoe told me they were dating, and I already had my doubts, but I tried not to prejudge. He arrived in an old bakery van, and the first thing I noticed is that he didn't make eye contact with me once during the first 10 minutes. Zoe was nervous, talking non-stop, filling the awkward silences, and Trevor just nodded and ate. I asked him normal questions. What are your plans for the future? Are you thinking about going back to school? What do you like to do? And his answers were like, I don't know. Maybe. I like playing video games. There. It was no substance, no ambition, nothing that made me think this guy was ready to be in a serious relationship, much less to get married. And, yeah, I know what you're thinking, that I'm being the typical overprotective father who no one is good enough for his daughter, but this wasn't that. This was genuine concern, because this guy had no direction, no plans, and Zoe was already pretty lost on her own. After dinner, when Trevor left, I tried to talk to Zoe. I told her, look, he seems like a nice guy, but don't you think it's too soon? You barely know him. And she got all defensive immediately, saying, I didn't understand. That Trevor was different. That he accepted her as she was. I told her I also accepted her as she was, that I only wanted the best for her, that she was in no rush to settle down. She was 19 years old, still finishing high school, had her whole life ahead of her. But you know how things are when someone young is in love, they don't listen to anything. I thought that, maybe with time she'd realize it herself, that the novelty would wear off, that the relationship would run its natural course. But 3 months later, 3 months, Zoe came home with a ring on her finger and told me Trevor had proposed and she had said yes. I froze. I literally couldn't speak for a full minute. Zoe was standing there waiting for me to say, congratulations, or hug her or something. But I couldn't. Finally, I said, 3 months. Zoe, you barely know this guy 3 months and you're already getting married? And she said, when you know, that time didn't matter, that they were in love. I asked her how they were going to live. With what money? Where? She shrugged and said they'd figure it out. That love was enough. And I, being the party pooper father that I apparently am, told her that love doesn't pay the rent, that love doesn't put food on the table, that they needed a plan. But she started crying and told me she knew I wouldn't approve, that I always found something wrong with everything she did. And that hurt, truthfully, because I had been there for her always, when her mother had basically emotionally abandoned her, when she dropped out of school, when she decided to go back, I had been there supporting her through everything. But I told her it wasn't that I didn't support her, it was that I was worried. I suggested that maybe they wait a year, that they live together first, that they see how things work before taking such a big step. But no, they had already set a date for 6 months later. They were already making plans. She had already told her mother, who of course was all excited because Melissa is one of those people who sees things superficially, like, oh, how romantic, so young and in love, without thinking about the practical consequences. I tried to talk to my mother, Violet, Zoe's grandmother, thinking that maybe she could talk to Zoe woman to woman. Violet is like 72 years old and doesn't beat around the bush. She tells it like it is. She invited Zoe to lunch and basically told her she was being an idiot, that she was throwing herself into disaster, that Trevor had no future. But that only made Zoe more stubborn. Because you know how it is, when everyone tells you not to do something, that only makes you want to do it more. The following weeks were tense. Zoe started avoiding me, only came home to pick up things, spent all her time with Trevor and planning this wedding that I knew they couldn't afford. And then one day she called me and said we needed to talk. I came to the house and she told me she had decided I wasn't invited to her wedding. That every time we talked I only criticized her decisions, that I took the joy out of everything, that I couldn't be happy for her. I told her that of course I wanted her to be happy, but that true happiness came from making smart decisions, not from jumping into something without thinking. She yelled at me that I was a hypocrite, that her mother and I had gotten married. Young we were 25 and 23, not 19 and 26, but whatever. And that our marriage had failed, so who was I to give advice? That hurt more than I want to admit. I told her that precisely because my marriage had failed, I knew how hard it was, how much more than love was needed, that maturity and stability and plans were needed. But she wasn't listening to me anymore. She told me that if I couldn't support her, then she didn't want me at her wedding, and she left. Just like that. And I stayed there in my house, in the same place where I had raised her, where we'd had so many good moments, and I felt completely useless. I thought about going after her, apologizing, telling her I'd be at her wedding no matter what. But then I thought, would that be helping her, or would it just be enabling her to make a huge mistake? So I didn't go after her. And that same night, I canceled the credit card I had given her years ago, for emergencies. I had been paying it religiously. It had never been a problem, but I knew that if I left that card active, they were going to use it for the wedding, and I wasn't going to finance something I knew was a disaster waiting to happen. Was it petty? Was it the right decision? I still don't know. Turns out, Zoe and Trevor took out a loan to pay for the wedding. A loan. Can you believe it? For a wedding that probably cost like $10,000, because Zoe wanted a pretty dress and a decent reception, and all those things that cost money they didn't have. My neighbor Brenda, who's been a family friend for years, went to the wedding because Zoe invited her, thinking that would bother me, I guess. And Brenda told me afterwards that it was nice but sad. Like there were about 30 people. Zoe's mother was there with her new family, but looked uncomfortable. Trevor's parents were clearly not happy, and Zoe looked beautiful but nervous. Brenda told me that at one point Zoe had asked if I had arrived, and when they told her no, her eyes filled with tears. But she went ahead anyway. And I was at home that day, trying to work but unable to concentrate, knowing my daughter was getting married and I wasn't there, and feeling like the worst person in the world, but also like I had done the only thing I could do. After the wedding, Zoe and Trevor moved into a small apartment like 20 minutes from my house. I didn't hear from her for weeks. And then one day Trevor showed up at my office. He hadn't even spoken to me since that awkward dinner months before, and suddenly he was there at my agency, looking uncomfortable among all the creatives and designers, asking if we could talk. I took him to my private office and he asked if I could help them with money. He said the bills were piling up, that the wedding loan had high monthly payments, that rent was more than they thought, that his salary delivering bread wasn't enough. And I, looking at him sitting there, this guy who had married my daughter knowing he couldn't support her, told him no. I told him this was the life they had chosen, that they were adults now, married, and that they had to figure out how to make it work. He got defensive, saying I was his father-in-law, that family was supposed to help each other. And I told him that helping would have been before they got married, when I tried to warn them, but that now helping them would just be enabling them to keep making bad decisions without consequences. He left angry. And that night, I got a call from Zoe. She was furious, yelling at me on the phone about how I could be so cruel, that Trevor just needed a little help, that I had the money and was being stingy out of pure spite. I told her it wasn't spite, it was a lesson, that if I kept rescuing her, she would never learn to stand on her own. She told me I was a bad father, that she wished her mother had been the one to raise her, and hung up. And that destroyed me. Because I had sacrificed so much to be there for her. I had worked double shifts for years to give her a good life, to make up for her mother's absence, and in a moment of anger she was telling me she would have preferred to be with Melissa, who had practically forgotten her. But I stood firm. I had to, because I knew that if I gave in now, I would be teaching her that bad decisions have no consequences, that there's always someone who's going to save her. A month later, Zoe called me crying, saying she thought she was pregnant, and all my anger melted immediately because she's my daughter, you know? It doesn't matter how angry I am with her, she's still my baby. I told her to come home, that we'd talk, that we'd figure out what to do. She came alone. Trevor had to work, apparently, and I hugged her for the first time in months. We did a pregnancy test and it came back negative, false alarm. But that scare had really scared her. She told me they weren't ready for a baby, that they could barely take care of themselves. And I wanted to tell her I told you so. I wanted to rub in her, face everything I had warned her about. But I didn't. I just held her and told her everything would be okay. That maybe this was a sign that they needed to be more careful, more responsible. She nodded, and for a moment I thought that maybe this would make her see the reality of her situation. But a week later, she called me asking if I could give Trevor a job at my agency. She said he needed a better job, that delivering bread wasn't enough, that if I gave him a chance, he could prove he was capable. And I wanted to say yes because I knew that would make Zoe happy. But I looked around my office, at all the talented people I had hired, people with education, with experience, with passion for what they did. And I thought about Trevor, who had none of that, that I would be hiring him only because he was my daughter's husband, not because he was qualified. I told her I couldn't do that it wouldn't be fair to my other employees, that Trevor needed to find his own way, and she got angry again, told me I just wanted to see them fail, that I enjoyed watching her suffer. She hung up before I could respond, and I didn't hear from her for 2 more weeks. Then I got a call from Melissa, my ex-wife, who basically never calls me unless it's something related to Zoe and she needs me to do something. She was furious, telling me that Zoe had come to visit her crying, that I had refused to help them, that I was being vindictive because she hadn't wanted me at her wedding. I explained my reasoning, but Melissa didn't want to hear it. She told me I had always been stubborn. That's why our marriage didn't work, that I needed to learn to let go and just support my daughter. And I, keeping calm even though I wanted to yell at her, told her that if she was so worried, she could help them. There was silence on the other end because we both knew Melissa wasn't going to do that. Not when she had 3 small children and a husband who probably wouldn't approve of giving money to, his stepdaughter from the first marriage. She told me I was an asshole and hung up. Typical Melissa, always very good at criticizing, but never at acting. Like 2 months later, Brenda told me that Zoe and Trevor had moved. Not to her mother's apartment because Trevor had stupid pride, but to the basement of Trevor's parents' house. The same bakery where he worked was connected to the house. Basically, they had failed so spectacularly at living independently that they had to move back with his parents. And I felt a mix of sadness and vindication because I was right about everything I had said, but I didn't want to be right. I wanted Zoe to be happy. I wanted her to prove me wrong, but she hadn't. She had taken exactly the path I had predicted, and now she was living in a basement with a husband who couldn't support her, working at who knows what because she had dropped out of high school again to get married, with no real future on the horizon. Brenda would tell me things she heard from the neighborhood, because Trevor's mother was known in the area and talked to other ladies. Apparently, Zoe and Trevor fought constantly. The basement walls were thin, and Trevor's parents could hear them yelling at each other. That money was always the topic, that Trevor blamed Zoe for making him feel inadequate and Zoe blamed Trevor for not trying harder. That Trevor's parents had told them they could stay there for a maximum of 1 year, but they needed a plan to get out. That Zoe had cried with Trevor's mother, saying she had made a mistake but didn't know how to fix it. And I heard all this, and my heart broke a little more each time, because this was my daughter, my only daughter, and she was suffering, but it had been her choice. She had chosen this over listening to me, over waiting, over being patient. Like 3 weeks ago, Zoe finally came to see me. She didn't call ahead, just showed up one Saturday afternoon. I was in the yard trying to fix the irrigation system that had broken, and when I looked up there, she was, standing at the entrance, looking thinner, more tired, older than someone 21 years old should look. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me, and I didn't know what to say either because there was so much between us, so much hurt, so much pride. Finally, I said, "Hi, Zoe," and she said, "Hi, Dad." I asked her if she wanted to come in, and she nodded, and we sat in the living room where we'd had so many conversations before, when she was younger, when things were simpler. She asked me how I was, and I told her good. Busy with work, the usual. I asked her how she was, and she shrugged, said surviving, that things were difficult but they were managing. She didn't ask me for money, which surprised me. She just wanted to talk, it seems. She told me about the basement, about Trevor's parents who were kind but clearly wanted their space back, about how Trevor was frustrated all the time because he felt trapped in his parents' job with no other options. She asked me about the agency, about my mother, about normal things. And I told her about all that, carefully avoiding the topic of marriage, of her decisions, because I didn't want her to leave again. Before leaving, she told me, "I think you were right, Dad. Not about everything, but about some things." And I told her that telling her no wasn't because I didn't love her, but precisely because I loved her too much. She nodded, hugged me quickly, and left. And it wasn't a movie moment where everything gets fixed and we cry and forgive each other everything. It was just a small step, an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, we could start to rebuild what had been broken. Last week she came again, and this time she stayed longer. She helped me make dinner, like baked chicken with vegetables, nothing fancy, and we ate together at the kitchen table like we used to do when she was a teenager. She didn't talk much about Trevor, just said they were in couples therapy, that his parents, they were paying for because they wanted the marriage to work since they're very religious. I don't know if it's going to work. Honestly, I don't know if Zoe and Trevor have enough foundation to build something real, something lasting. But it's not my decision either, right? She's an adult now, for better or worse, married, and she has to navigate this on her own. My job now is to be there when she needs me, without being condescending, without saying, I told you so, just being her father. She's learning hard lessons, and it hurts to watch her learn this way, but maybe these are the lessons she needed. I don't know, truthfully. I still wonder if I did the right thing, if I should have been more flexible, more lenient. But I also know that if I had kept rescuing her, she never would have learned to stand on her own. So, here we are, 2 years after that disaster of a wedding I wasn't part of, trying to find a new normal. She comes to visit me every 2 weeks now, kind of. And that's something, I guess.